Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Dark Phoenix Gaming here, and welcome. I know I've kind of been off the airwaves for a while now, but just some IRL stuff that has taken me away from the channel. I will try to get back to it more next year, but it's that time of year. We have come around to the time of year again, where I make a list of games and talk about that list. Specifically, it's time for my list of my favorite games that I played this year. So, before we get started with that, I have a list of honorable mentions, or games that I've chosen to veto from the list. Anyways, taking it from the top. The first game, which in any other year would have been top of my list, but I actually decided that giving it to the same game over and over again, regardless of personal enjoyment, wasn't really being fair to the other games I'd played this year, because I'd essentially already locked in my first place. And it was basically a given. I wanted to give other things a chance to be first place. So, I've actually decided that from now on it will go on honorable mentions. So, my first honorable mention is actually Final Fantasy XIV, which I played a whole lot less this year than the usual, but still quite a bit, and I know people have issues with the game in its current state, but I am, by every definition, a casual. I play it because I think it's fun, and I don't have the issues with the Dawn Trail story that a lot of people seem to. I will go back to it sometime this next year, I'm almost certain. But, like I said, I just wanted to give other games a chance to shine and not have the first place spot be so locked down like I have the past few years. So that's why it's an honorable mention now. It's not that I don't like it anymore, it's more so that I felt like I wasn't being fair to the other stuff I was playing. Anyways, next on my list is Guild Wars 2, which is, for a similar reason to Final Fantasy XIV, I really like it, and I have a ton of fun. It and 14 are the only two MMOs I play, basically. At this point, I've dropped all other MMOs like a rock, and I have no intention of going back to any of them. Final Fantasy XIV and Guild Wars 2 are enough for me, and Guild Wars 2 does still hold the crown of the only MMO that actually encourages me to explore the world and makes it interesting, rather than a chore. It has that going for it. But, at the same time, there's other stuff that I'm playing more of. MMOs, I don't play a lot of. So Guild Wars 2, even though I have sunk a bunch of time into it, it's more just a thing that I do in between playing other games than actually me going, oh, I want to play an MMO now. So yeah, that's part of the reason, and also, I just more enjoy single-player games these days above MMOs, so that kind of put it further down the list. But now we can get to the overtly single-player stuff that's either things that I haven't played enough, things that I didn't feel were that great to really warrant a spot in my top list, or just that sort of thing. Anyways, first on my list is Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, which I've played this year, but I'm going to be straight with you guys. I didn't finish this game. I got to about the Frieza saga, and then I dropped it. I just didn't find it that enjoyable. The combat was tedious, the open world seemed like just a thing that was shoved in there to increase the length and everything, and as far as a Dragon Ball Z game, which I'm a big Dragon Ball Z fan, always have been, but as far as a game in the Dragon Ball Z universe that is open world and all, I'm not sure how well that can work in a lot of cases. And just in general, it's not a bad game or anything. I just felt it was distinctly average and quite mid, if I'm being honest. It's sort of a similar issue to the one that I had with Hogwarts Legacy, where I felt like the game would have been better if it hadn't been open world and had just been more linear and maybe limited open world in very specific areas rather than having everything be open and a ton of pointless side quests that are literally just filler, with one occasional halfway decent one. But yeah, I just couldn't bring myself to enjoy the game enough to go any further than that, so I stopped playing it. Thankfully I didn't spend a lot on this, and I'd had it for a few years, so it's not like I wasted any money. But moving on, Brutal Legend is actually next on my list, which some of you may know for being on the Xbox 360. I actually played the PC version. Anyways, the PC version of Brutal Legend is what we're talking about here, and this game's an interesting one. It's sort of one part action and combat game, one part strategy with you playing as the commander, which is interesting, and I like the hybridization. It was definitely an experiment that I'm glad was done, but that experiment did come with some pitfalls, namely the fact that as things were in the game, it unfortunately means that, well, how do I put this? Rather than it being an excellent action game or an excellent third-person strategy game, that it just ended up being average at both, and was, in a lot of ways, pretty unremarkable in that way. And let's be honest, nobody played Brutal Legend for the story. That part was kind of cringe, but that was one of the good bits, and just the mindless combat sections and all. This is one of those games that I loved it, warts and all, but not enough to make it one of my top games of the year, if you know what I'm saying. So that's essentially why it's down here in this category. And next on my list may surprise you, but, well, a good number of them didn't make it onto the list this year just because I haven't gotten very far in a decent chunk. I have been playing a lot of retro games this year, and my next on the list is actually Donkey Kong 3, which I don't want to diss any of your classics or anything, but Donkey Kong 3, compared to a lot of the other games this year, it just doesn't measure up. It's not a bad game by any means, but being effectively a third-person platformer shooter in a Donkey Kong skin, it's not an amazing game, and I don't know that I'll ever go back to it, but it was fun, and I am glad I played it. It's just the sort of game that, compared to some of the other heavy hitters that I played this year, you're going to struggle to justify putting Donkey Kong 3 anywhere other than the honorable mentions, I think. And the same thing is true of our next entry. Because next in the honorable mentions, we have Warcraft, Orcs and Humans. So, this one, in general, I'm in the camp that actually believes that a lot of older Blizzard games have aged spectacularly, to be perfectly honest. Including Diablo 1. Yes, I'm one of those people. Who, despite only playing it in like 2020, 2021, I am an avid Diablo 1 defender. But Warcraft 1 is the exception I will make for this. I feel like, even in comparison to something like StarCraft 1 or strategy games that came out just a little bit after it, it didn't age very well, and things like having to use hotkeys to right-click and only being able to select 4 units at a time and no control groups, and all of these little niggles and things that you don't have to deal with in slightly less ancient RTS games, let's just say. All of it adds up to make Orcs and Humans a game that I don't know that I'll play again, and also just not nearly as good as a lot of other games in its genre, even in a similar era. Like I said, I would rather play StarCraft 1 than Warcraft Orcs and Humans, if given the choice. Even though, from what I recall, they're fairly similar in release dates. Yeah. It's not that it's a bad game, it's just there's too many things that date it in such a way to make aspects less enjoyable, and that just sort of compounds on itself quite a bit. Next honorable mention, Final Fantasy XIII. I actually played Final Fantasy XIII this year for the first time ever. Shocking, I know. You would think I would have played it when it came out, but at the time, the Final Fantasy series just kind of sped completely by me. And of course, you'll notice the last few years had nothing but Final Fantasies all over my lists. You're going to notice a distinct lack of Final Fantasy this year, minus a couple. So, yeah. Anyways, Final Fantasy XIII. I actually enjoy it. I didn't find the story nearly as awful or cringe as a lot of people. And I thought the battle system and mode switching, or whatever you want to call it, was fine. I didn't have anything against that. And I had a good time playing it overall. It's just here because, as I've said with a few past ones, it really just could not stand up to the sheer heavy hitters that were some of the items that made it onto my main list, which had the result of relegating FF13 to being an honorable mention. Okay, moving on to our next honorable mention, we have Guild Wars Reforged. So, ArenaNet, the people behind Guild Wars 2, released a remaster of sorts that was also a patch upgrade to the original Guild Wars this year, which is what Guild Wars Reforged is. It's updated Guild Wars 1 to make it mechanically easier to get into, which some people might not like because it did straight up overwrite the old game, but I never played the original Guild Wars beyond like 20 or 30 minutes of messing around in the starter areas before that update. So I have no horse in that race. And the reason it's down here in honorable mentions is quite simple. I haven't had enough time to play it to form a proper opinion. I played a little bit of the game right after the Reforged came out, and I enjoy it, but I just haven't played much of it. I want to play more of the games so that I have a chance to form a proper opinion first before I put it on any lists, which is why it's down here. And last on my list of honorable mentions, this may offend some people, but I promise I have a good reason for it. Hollow Knight Silk Song. Okay, Silk Song. I actually got it fairly recently, during the currently ongoing winter sale on GOG. In fact, And the reason it's an honorable mention and not on my list proper is because I'm still in Act 1 of Silksong. To be completely honest, I don't feel like I've played enough of the game to be able to make an informed judgment about it or really say much towards the game. I know I like it, and I know I'm having a good time with it, and all of that, but I haven't finished nearly enough of the game that I feel it would be justified to put it on my top list. I feel like I should at least finish through Act 2 before I actually put it on any lists. So maybe next year we'll see if Silksong ends up being a thing that I play through that far over the course of the next year.
But for now, I just don't feel like putting Silksong on this list would really be appropriate, given all of that. But that is really going to be it as far as my honorable mentions are concerned. So we can move on to the items that actually earned a proper spot on the list. And in at number 15, we have Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, which some people may actually be quite surprised to see Assassin's Creed 4 so low on the list. And it's not so much that I didn't really enjoy the game or anything, because I did. In fact, it was spectacular. And it was probably the Assassin's Creed game I've played of late that I had the most fun with. Now granted, the other Assassin's Creed games that I've played in recent times were Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Assassin's Creed Valhalla, so that's not really saying much. It wasn't exactly competing against anything, so that's pretty obvious. But there's just a lot of other stuff I played this year that I had more fun in than this one, which is primarily down to personal taste, if I'm being completely honest. Just because the open world, climb the towers, do the side activities type model that's in every Ubisoft game, and in the majority of open world or semi-open world games in modern gaming, it just doesn't appeal to me so much anymore. Like, there are some that do that I really love and will always argue that they're the best, but to be honest, as far as Assassin's Creed goes, if you were to ask me to pick my favorite in the series, then it would probably be either 2 or Brotherhood, and as good as Assassin's Creed Black Flag was, it really can't do better than those two, which is part of the reason why it's this slow, other than just the fact that I enjoyed other stuff I played this year more. But the parts that I did like about this game were primarily down to the ship stuff, like the simulating being a pirate and everything. I had a blast with that, just being able to raid ships and everything, but mixed in with how enjoyable the ship combat was and the plundering and stuff and upgrading the ship, there were a few things that I found to be not exactly the best and thought that they could have done with some improvements. For one thing, there is a very annoying thing that this game did, where your ship actually had levels depending on how many upgrades you'd given it, which was annoying because there were certain story missions that you needed to be at a certain minimum level to be able to effectively complete them. And if you weren't, then you had to abandon the story, have everything just come to a grinding halt and go off and, for lack of a better term, just farm or grind upgrades by attacking ships. and that sort of thing, which could take a while. I just found that very annoying and thought it kind of broke the flow. The other thing that I didn't like, which should come as no surprise to anyone, was the stealth missions on your ship, where you had to basically sneak around and follow people while inside of a ship, which I already don't like the stealthily follow people and don't get spotted type objectives from the tailing missions in traditional Assassin's Creed. This just kind of made it worse. And the real-world plot stuff was a non-factor to me because I've never particularly cared about it in Assassin's Creed. Like, the stuff with Desmond in 2, Brotherhood, Revelation, and to a lesser extent 3, it was kind of neat and all, and I had some enjoyment I got out of that, but for the most part, I play Assassin's Creed to mess around in a cool historical sandbox, and I tend to just get through the real world stuff as fast as I can, and I don't care for it at all, so that doesn't really have a factor to play in this. I have no horse in that race. But yeah, that, for the most part, is why Assassin's Creed 4 is where it is on the list. So now, moving on to number 14. Now, and at number 14, we have a PS2 game called Gungrave. This is one of many for that system that I hadn't discovered yet. Like, I swear, the PS2 has some of the most amazing undiscovered titles ever. I will die on the hill that the PS2 is the greatest gaming console ever made. Some of you PS1 and N64 and Sega Saturn stands may disagree with me, but fuck it. Anyways, to get back on point, we're talking about a game called Gungrave for my number 14, and Gungrave is a third-person hallway shooter. It has a story and it has mechanics, but the basic gameplay loop is you are here, go on missions, kill everything that moves. That's the basic gist of it. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't pay much attention to the story. I like this game because it's a fun, exciting time, and I enjoy the action gameplay loop. Like, there's some story, and you're lugging around a coffin that you can hit people with as well, but I mostly just enjoy the action shooty bits. And yeah, that's really why I enjoyed this one. It's quite simply just that I find the gameplay loop very compelling and enjoyable. There's not really a whole lot to say here, and I'm sure some people might analyze the story or something, but I just had a lot of fun playing it, and that's the extent of this. Anyways, yeah, time to move on for number 13, I guess. So, in a bit of a divergence from my previous shooty bang bang entry, the one that's won my spot for number 13 is Tavern Master, which is a more chill sort of game. It's a cross between business simulation, economic management, and just relaxation simulator. So, as the name would suggest, in this game, you run a tavern, and it starts small and you sort of build it up. There's also a little bit of building the actual tavern involved, because you have to expand it and everything and set the structure and stuff, which is really nice. And the tutorial has you actually knocking down some walls to get more space and things. It starts out, you're serving maybe 4 or 5 customers a drink or two, and that's it. But eventually can expand to the point where you're serving dozens, maybe hundreds of people across multiple floors, and hosting parties for nobility. It can get really intense sometimes. I didn't get insanely far into the game, but I got to the point where I had a 2-floor tavern and multiple kitchens. So I feel like I've done enough in here to say this is a pretty fun game, and if you like that sort of management simulation aspect to it, then you'll enjoy this one, because you have to pay for a ton of stuff, so the aspect of making sure you're bringing in enough money to afford everything and keep growing your tavern is really enjoyable, I find. Then again, I do kind of like this sort of game when it's done right, which this one very much is. So, if that's your sort of thing, maybe check it out. So, coming up next on the list of top games of 2025 that I played in 2025, we have Metroid Fusion. Because up until very recently, I actually hadn't played a Metroid game. And yet, I played 2 of them in 2025. Granted, not to completion, but I did play a lot of them, and I did rather enjoy them. And the other one is further down the list, so you'll have to wait and see on that. But Metroid Fusion, I had fun and I found it interesting, but I can sort of see where a lot of people are coming from, because I know there's sort of the impression that Metroid Fusion is less of a Metroid game because it's extremely railroady and it forces you down a specific path rather than letting you go off and do your own thing. Like, you can't sequence break, you can't find things out of order, which I know is a fairly core Metroid thing, although it's not something that I've really engaged in yet. That being said, I did have a lot of fun with Metroid Fusion, even if it is more kind of on rails, because from what I've heard, this was the first time they were actually trying to do something more heavy on the narrative and story focus, which would have kind of been a little difficult with the story being so open-ended and everything like happens in a traditional Metroid game. So other than like some vague cutscenes and a sense of the world, generally from what I've seen in the YouTube retrospectives on Metroid that I've watched in the past, generally story will be pretty limited in a lot of Metroid games. That was the case certainly throughout Zero Mission. There's plenty of cutscenes and a sense of what you're going next, but it doesn't go out of its way to tell you a story, even if there is one there if you want to look for it. Which is different with Metroid Fusion, because their focus was a lot on telling the story. But even with that, I had a lot of fun with Fusion, and it was very enjoyable. Just not enough to crack into my top 10 games for this year. So, in at number 11, we have Bayonetta. Which, yeah, this is the year I played Bayonetta for the first time, which might come across as weird to some people, but it's just a game that never found itself on my radar for the longest time, and I couldn't tell you why. I mean, I had it on my Steam wishlist for years and years before I finally bought it on a sale, and then years and years more before I finally played it. It's strange. It's the sort of game that I always would have liked, but I just never played it before now, because action fighting game with a sexy witch, that's the sort of thing that you'd think, well, the Xbox 360 was my main console of choice back in the early 2010s, that I would have jumped on this game then, because it was on the 360, but I just never played it at the time. It's so strange. But yeah, if you're hoping for some in-depth analysis of the story, you ain't gonna get one from me. To be honest, I played it more for the action and the combat, just because I thought it was really cool and engaging and fun, and I really liked the boss fights and everything. Stuff like that was more my speed than anything story related. Like, I'll have to go back through it again and see if the story hooks me more a second time through, because I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to that overall. I know you kill God at some point, and there's something vaguely time travel and amnesia related going on, but honestly, a lot of the times when Bayonetta was on screen, my brain just kind of shut off, and I was more focused on punching demons in the face and things like that. As far as that goes, it's the sort of game that, from my very limited experience, because I've only played it once so far, you don't need to engage with the story to get a good time out of it. It's an enjoyable game whether you're paying attention to the story or you're just beating up anything that moves. Which is, I think, a mark of a good game, where the story is optional and you don't have to be paying attention to it in order to have a good time with the game. Which is a little strange coming from someone like me, who plays mostly RPGs and strategy games with a pretty heavy role-playing slant, so generally games without a pretty strong story hook can be a bit of a turn-off to me, but with Bayonetta, that wasn't the case, and it's really interesting. I'll have to see how I feel about this one after a second playthrough, because it's the sort that definitely merits one of those, and I want to give it another go. After all of that, we have reached number 10. So we're finally starting to get into the games that I would consider actual proper heavy hitters. And starting us off at number 10, we have Last Epoch, which I played for the first time this year. Now, Last Epoch, it's an ARPG sort of in the style of something like Diablo or Grim Dawn. And I really had a lot of fun with it. Last Epoch is one where they don't feel the need to make the game super challenging or extra hard or anything. It's an easy game overall. At least I found it to be one. As long as you're paying attention, you will generally be able to get through things without too much difficulty. With the exception of one specific boss fight, which I won't spoil it just in case anyone has yet to play the story, but there's a multi-phased boss fight in the latter parts of the game, which mechanically it's just such utter bullshit, and it's the sort of one that can actually take quite a while to get through and be very annoying. And I played that fight as a Necromancer Summoner class, so I can only imagine what it will be like for someone playing a primarily melee build. One of the things I do like about Last Epoch is that you seemingly don't have to look up a build guide or anything. You can just sort of roll with whatever build you're feeling as you go, and the game is flexible enough to let you do that without it being too much of a hassle. Narratively, I would describe the story and elements and stuff like that, although they are fairly simple. It goes along. It borrows some time travel stuff from Chrono Trigger, which I thought was pretty cool. The way they did that, honestly, because they do the hopping between different eras thing quite a bit, and it's fun. Like, it's a pretty simple story, and the one problem I do have with their story is they sort of leave it off at the end without a proper resolution, was the feeling I got once I'd finished it. It seems to be suggested I haven't played enough of this to know if this is the case or not, that the story conclusion is found in the end game content, so you have to grind through some of their repeatable dungeons to get the actual conclusion to that, which I'm not a big fan of, but the mechanical gameplay loop was really enjoyable, and I had a great time with this. Generally, I don't play ARPGs for the story, so the fact that it was a bit wooden, I guess I would say, didn't bother me as much as it probably did some other people. Like, I know what I'm getting into with an ARPG, and I'm not likely to see a particularly deep story in most of them, and I know that going in, so I wasn't upset about that being the case, because I expected it. Anyways, I had a great time with this one. I haven't played it in a good long while, because ARPG endgame and stuff, after you've actually gotten through the primary story stuff, to me, the just repeatedly grinding random dungeon things to get better gear, I never found that particularly fun or enjoyable, and more tedious and irritating than anything, so I tend to not do it. As a result, I haven't really played the post-story content that much, but even so, I put about 50 hours or thereabouts into this game. Yeah, looking on Steam right now, I've played it for 48 hours. So, it was fun enough to keep my attention for a full playthrough, but I doubt that I'll ever actually do anything with the endgame content. Might go back and do the story with some different classes a few times, because the actual stuff like that was pretty fun. And one thing they did, which I thought was cool, was you can actually skip segments of the story if you really want to get to the endgame stuff, because there's a system where you can go through these dungeons that sort of act as shortcuts to let you hop your way through giant segments of the story and not have to sit through the entire thing if you just want to do the combat content. But you need key items to get into that, so it lets you skip stuff if you have another character that's further along, but that's for like an alternative second playthrough. Also, don't ask me about the seasonal content or whatever, which they have it, but I play this game almost exclusively offline, so I wouldn't know anything about that. Anyways, great game, if not amazing, and I had enough of a good time to recommend it, at least in the state it was in when I finished it. But I don't know what any updates have done to it since, so I'll have to come back to that at a later point in time. Now, at number 9, we have a fun little GBA action platformer game called Ninja 5-0, which is, like I said, it's an action game where you play as a ninja and kill enemies and go through multiple stages. And just having to figure out all the different approaches to fighting enemies and getting through the stage without dying is actually quite fun, because some of them can get quite tricky. And I enjoyed the puzzle of figuring out each stage and how to approach things. And they also make things interesting because the game throws in a little bit of hostage rescue, because some of the enemies will be holding civilian NPCs hostage, and you have to strike them at precisely the right angle to kill only the enemy, and also save the civilian, because they can get killed in the crossfire if you screw it up, which makes things very interesting having a bonus objective like that. And honestly, there's just a lot of good things to say about this game. But what I will also say is don't buy the GBA version on eBay. This game is going for more than Pokemon right now, which is saying something. Like, Pokemon Emerald is a bargain bin product compared to this thing on the original GBA cartridge. Fortunately, it got a release on the Switch. Oh, if you want to play this game, I would highly recommend just going for the version on Switch instead of the GBA one. Like, it sucks that there's not a reasonable way to play the original, but unless you know of another way to approach that, I really have to recommend the Switch one. Fortunately, it's on the Switch 1, not the Switch 2. So that's somewhat helpful in that regard. Anyways, this is just a fun action platformer that I really enjoyed my time with. And overall, other than some brief cutaways stuff, it doesn't seem like there's really a story to this game. It's probably one of those that they present the story in the manual and stuff. So that would be potentially why I don't know anything about it. But yeah, the focus here is more on the action and the combat and everything than any story implications, so I don't think there's any great loss, but I had a great time with this one, and I'm definitely going to keep coming back to it. And my goal is to reach the point where I can play it on the hardest difficulty and not get my ass nailed to the wall, so I have quite a bit to go before that, because I did play it on the standard difficulty my first time through. And in at number 8, we have Pokemon Omega Ruby. So, some context for this one. I've actually not played a Pokemon game for the longest time. And this is the first one I ever actually played to full completion. As in, I actually finished the league in it and didn't just drop the game partway through because something else caught my eye. Omega Ruby was the first one I ever finished. For the longest time, Pokemon just didn't interest me. Like, I had a Game Boy Advance when I was a kid. My dad got it for me for my 9th or 10th birthday. I honestly can't remember which. And he got me a copy of Pokemon Blue for the original Game Boy with it. I actually don't know if he got it or it came with the console. But yeah, that was the first game that I got, and I honestly didn't find it very interesting, so I traded it in to get a copy of Mega Man Battle Network, which is the first real game that I actually played, given how little time I invested into Blue. And over the years, I just never had much interest in Pokemon. I tried playing Legends Arceus on the Switch back when I had that console, but it just didn't gel with me, and I don't know why. And so yeah, for the longest time, Pokemon has just not been very interesting to me, and I've not really cared for it. But I do own a 3DS, and I've been playing a bunch of stuff on that system this year, in addition to the PC and console stuff. And for whatever reason, I decided that I wanted to play Pokemon Omega Ruby. I just thought it looked neat. And I just started playing and found it so compelling and interesting, just going through everything, catching the Pokemon and figuring out the battle stuff, and it just... I just found it interesting and fun in a way that my previous attempts at playing the series, abortive as they were, or however you say that, the brief attempts that I had in the past, I just found Omega Ruby interesting and compelling in a way that my past attempts hadn't been. Although, to be fair, those past attempts were Pokemon Blue when I was 9, and like I said, that brief attempt at Legends Arceus, so maybe I shouldn't count the series out yet. I'm planning to try Pokemon Emerald so that I'm in a position to make a proper comparison between ORAS and Emerald, and I've got a run going in Fire Red right now, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I can't really explain why I like Omega Ruby. I just find it to be a lot of fun, and I really enjoy it, and I'm definitely looking forward to starting a second playthrough soon. Which, some people might consider it wild that I didn't really get into playing Pokemon for the first time until I was in my early 30s, but yeah, it is what it is, and I don't really know how to express this better, but it's just one of those games that it's this high on this list because I had a good time with it, and there's really nothing more to it than that. And sitting here at number 7, we find Metroid Zero Mission for the Game Boy Advance, because this is actually the first year for a lot of franchises with me. First Pokemon and first Metroid. I mean, I tried the original NES variant of Metroid a few times, but I just couldn't get into it. I found a lot of the design stuff to be a little bit too hostile, and it was just the sort of game that I didn't find myself enjoying all that much. I'm not saying it's a bad game, to be clear. I'm saying it's just not for me. Maybe I'll try it again at some point, I don't know, but overall, I think Zero Mission is going to be an actual replacement for the first one for me, even if it does change some stuff. Honestly, I think most of it's probably a positive, but yeah, to be honest, for the most part, I haven't played that many Metroidvanias, and some of the ones that I have played, they might not even count as Metroidvanias. If you want to look at the full list of Metroidvanias, or close enough to maybe count, type of games that I have played, well, there's Dead Cells, but honestly, that's probably more of a roguelike than a Metroidvania. Other than that, Hollow Knight, Silk Song, and I did play a little bit of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. That's about it. It's not a genre I've had a whole lot of exposure to, but the whole gameplay loop of going places, exploring until you get blocked, then finding something to remove a block, rinse and repeat, and fighting bosses and all. I just find the whole concept and the loop of how things go really cool, and I just love my time with Metroid Zero Mission, and I also seem to be the odd one out here because the stealth segment after the fight with Mother Brain, that whole thing, I actually liked it. Yes. Generally, forced stealth segments that getting caught is pretty close to a failed condition like this. Generally, that whole thing I absolutely despise. But I think the fact that the game actually lets you fight back to some limited degree, even if it's just enough to run away again, actually made it more tolerable. The fact that getting caught was not instant failure and all that thing just made it so that it wasn't as bad as it could be, I guess you would say. Anyways, just the whole loop and experience of this, it was the first real Metroidvania that I finished. And honestly, I think I could not have picked a better one to experience. And comparing it to Metroid Fusion, which I'm still playing through now, but as you saw, it was earlier in my list. I played enough of it to, I think, get a sense of things, and I definitely prefer Zero Mission over Fusion. Not necessarily because of the railroady nature of Fusion, although that is a factor. I just find, as a game, the fact that I'm able to do more and just in general, it feels more like what I've heard a Metroidvania is supposed to be, and I just had more fun with Zero Mission compared to Fusion. That's really the long and short of it. Now, my number 6 on this list may actually surprise a few people, because I know a lot of people who have been kind of iffy on this, and maybe they either don't like it as much as its predecessor, or they like it equally and think they're equally bad, or any mix of those. But my next item on the list is actually Final Fantasy XIII-2. Now, if you recall, Final Fantasy XIII was on my honorable mentions for this year, because, well, I did beat both of them, and I liked all of the Final Fantasy games I've played so far. Of the two, I think XIII-2 was closer to a traditional Final Fantasy, and that sort of made it more appealing to me, because Final Fantasy XIII, outside of a very specific section, pretty close to the end of the game, it was a fairly scripted and on-rails experience, and it just had you going from plot point to plot point. Unlike the open-ended approach that a lot of the Final Fantasy games from 1 through 9 took, where everything was just, you had to figure it out for yourself and everything, and there wasn't really, things were a lot less structured, and you as the player had much more agency in deciding how you wanted to approach things. Also, with very few exceptions, like I said, Final Fantasy XIII didn't really have side content other than some optional bounty hunting missions, and they did kind of bring that back for XIII-2, which I really liked, and the fact that it encouraged you to go back to previous areas to find stuff and things, I thought it was really cool. And even if the combat systems were a little wonky in a couple of ways, XIII-2 did remove one thing that absolutely infuriated me in Final Fantasy XIII. See, 13, it had a mechanic where if your party leader went down, that was a game over. Literally, party leader dies, you're out of the fight. And most games, I don't actually like that particular thing, where if one very specific character dies, then that's the end of it. I've never been a massive fan of that. There's like 1 or 2 games where I feel like it's approached reasonably enough that I don't find it too much of a bother, but Final Fantasy XIII was never that for me. I always preferred the ones where you had to have your entire party go down before it was considered a wipe, and I liked how they changed it back to that approach for XIII-2, so this is one of those that, yeah, I had some issues, but honestly, in a lot of ways, I actually kind of liked the story, which might be a bit bizarre for some people to hear, but I actually think they did a good job overall with the story in this game, even though it's nowhere approaching my favorite Final Fantasy game. That would be either 6 or 7, but I still had a good time with it, and as a character, I actually liked like Sarah, and I think they did her pretty well, even if the ending, I wish I could have altered that a little bit. And that's all I'm going to say for the sake of avoiding spoilers. But yeah, I had a good time, and I think the story was good enough for what they were going for. Even if I know a lot of people weren't the biggest fans of it, I thought it was good enough. And yeah, most of my enjoyment of this game, though, I will be honest, comes from a mechanical perspective, and like the game mechanics of the fights and everything I found quite enjoyable, and just being able to get out there and explore the world to some degree without having to do the absurd open world stupid exploration things that a lot of games seem to be favoring these days. I felt like it was a good middle ground balance between the two, and I just really liked that. And now we've finally reached number 5 on the list, and we're getting into the true heavy hitters. The ones that were the absolute quality experiences, best of the best, out of everything I played this year, so I hope you're ready for that. So, at number 5, we have Grim Dawn, which, Grim Dawn, like Diablo, and more recently with stuff I played this year, like Last Epoch, is an ARPG, and this one is actually pretty interesting, because it actually managed to do some cool stuff with the story and the environmental storytelling. Like, because the setting is a kind of post-apocalypse thing, where you're fighting against, like, demons and evil spirits and the undead and stuff. It's a whole thing. Anyways, I'm not going to spoil too much, but I will have to talk about the story a little bit here. So, it starts out, you're possessed by an evil spirit. They're called ethereals for context. And the guys who are a main part of the story, they catch you and they're about to hang you. Like, literally rope around your neck, hang you. And the spirit leaves your body to avoid being killed when you die, so they cut you down, and you have to help them out. And one very interesting thing that Grim Dawn does that a lot of other ARPGs tend not to is that you actually by default are multi-classing, so you can unlock a first character class at like level 2 or level 3, and then you get another one a few levels down the line, and you can use abilities for both together simultaneously, and they can meld together really well. And Grim Dawn actually utilizes that really well, and their level up and ability systems it's honestly one of the best I've seen in any ARPG I've played. It's not like ridiculously simple like the ones in early Diablo games where you don't really have to engage with anything, but it's not stupid complicated like something like Path of Exile is, where you literally need a spreadsheet and a website open to a build guide to know what you're doing so that you don't screw yourself over. But I'd say it has enough complexity where you want to learn more about how to engage with it, but it's simple enough, whereas you can get through things just by picking what looks cool, and generally that will be enough. And on the note of the combat system, it is the traditional ARPG type combat, but Grim Dawn actually managed to do something that I've not seen any other ARPG I've ever played you'd actually manage successfully, which is they managed to make summoning minions actually useful and usable without making it so overpowered that having summons effectively means that you've already won. I'm sure you can make it stupid overpowered, but just playing the way I tend to, of just picking stuff based off what I think looks cool and interesting, then you're not going to wind up with summon builds that are so powerful that you can literally beat anything by standing still. And part of the way they did this is a lot of ARPGs, specifically Last Epoch, they will do this thing where if you have summons out, then enemies will just default to attacking the summons. But in Grim Dawn, it's actually quite common for you to have summons on the field, but the enemies will still go and try to attack you directly and not just focus on the summons. So you do still have to express some concern for yourself, and having summons is not just an immediate, you will never get harmed, ever. So I just feel like the way they blend a whole lot of stuff in Grim Dawn together is really fun, and they do a great job of making the game fun with enough challenge to be interesting and worth engaging with, but not so absurdly hard that you need a guide to not kill yourself by just playing the game. Now, one last note on Grim Dawn, and this is a thing that probably more than a few people aren't going to care about, and this may just be a me thing, but it's something I always like when ARPGs offer it. It's the fact that the multiplayer and co-op and online stuff in Grim Dawn, it's just an optional add-on, and I hear from a lot of people that the multiplayer is actually not very good, and it's not so much competitive multiplayer as it's like a co-op thing. You're helping each other out, but Grim Dawn, you do not need internet to play. You can literally pull out your Ethernet cable or disconnect from Wi-Fi, and the game will not care. It will keep chugging along regardless. And that, in all honesty, is one of my favorite parts. The fact that I can be offline and keep playing. I don't need a constant internet connection to play this game is probably one of the things that drew me to it the most. And now we are at number 4, and slotting in at number 4 for the games I played in 2025 is Persona 3 Reload, because I did actually play it for the first time this year, although I just want to clarify that this is just the base game. I haven't played the Episode Igus DLC yet, so I'm not going to be speaking to that at all because I have no experience with it. This is also only to do with the remake. I still need to finish Persona 3 FES on my PS2, so I can't really make any comparisons between the two. I only know that I really liked Reload, and I thought it was a great game. Honestly, ever since I started playing the Persona games this year again, they have honestly been some of my favorite video games ever. Like, I've always been a massive JRPG fan, so the Persona series was never not going to steal a slot high on my list. That part wasn't unexpected. What was a little unexpected to me was just how much damn fun that I ended up having with this game. Like, I just kept coming back to it again and again and again, and it's quite rare for me to actually binge through JRPGs like this. Generally, I tend to spread out my playtime a little bit more, but this one, I played basically nothing but Persona 3 for months and months at a time. It really did just appeal to me like nothing else, and I can't describe it, but honestly, just the mix of the ordinary student by day, superhero by night vibe they had going on just made it a lot of fun for me, and I really liked the time I spent with this one, and also the puzzle, if you want to call it that, of figuring out the persona system and what to fuse into what to make the best builds that I could. I just enjoyed figuring that out without using a guide, because honestly, I recently started getting into the whole thing of playing most games without a guide unless I got specifically lost and needed to look up a particular thing, and Persona 3, just playing it and figuring things out as I did, just going off instincts and stuff, I guess you'd say, I think that made it a whole lot more fun than if I'd used a guide or walkthrough or something, and this is absolutely, even not giving the DLC any consideration, something that I'm going to be coming back to again and again and again. That's not even a question. In fact, if I look at my Steam replay charts, this game, Persona 3 Reload, was actually 7% of my total playtime on Steam this year, which is really quite impressive when you think about it. And at long last, we have reached my number 3 game of the year, and honestly, these top 3 games, they could have gone in any particular order, and I probably only decided what would be 1, 2, and 3 respectively right at the last minute, because they're all just so good and I had such an excellent time with them that I really was struggling to come up with the particular order for them. But in at number 3 is Nier Automata, or Nier Automata, however you want to say it. And honestly, I'd had the Nier games on my radar for the longest time. I really had, but I hadn't got around to buying or playing any of them until this year, and this is just one of those games, it just absolutely sucked me in and hooked me. I just absolutely adored the story and the whole world-building presentation thing they had going on. Like, for context, I've never played any of the Drakengard games, so I'm not familiar with the background lore especially well, although I had spent some time binging a couple of multi-hour-long YouTube videos talking about the Drakengard lore after I finished Automata, so I'm a bit more familiar with that now, and just honestly, leaving realism aside a moment for what should be obvious reasons, the way they did the narrative and the story building and just the general themes in this game was just absolutely brilliant, and I just couldn't get enough of it. And of course, it being a JRPG, albeit more of an action-focused one than most of what I tend to play in that genre, really made this one appeal to me a ton, and I just absolutely loved it. And I thought the combat was a lot of fun. It might not have been brilliant or perfect or anything, but it was what it needed to be, and that was good enough for me, and I just had a great time with this game. Really, is the best way to put it, I guess. I thought the story was brilliant. I had a good time going through it, and the fact that you have to play the story, parts of it at least, multiple times from different angles, I actually liked that, because I wanted to keep going through it again and again and again. after my first time finishing it, so I consider that more of a net positive than anything. And I just really had a good time with it. And I will absolutely, without a shadow of doubt, be going back to play this one again in the future. It's not even a question. And for my number 2 favorite game that I played this year, this slot goes to Nier Replicant. Yeah, I've heard that there's a lot of people who were hit or miss on this one, and I even have managed to hear the game is too bloated complaint, which people who are saying that, I feel like they've never played a JRPG before, or they wanted it to be faster than it was, which, fair enough, but I feel like it's an excellent game if you go in knowing what you're getting into, and it's your type of game. I absolutely adored this one, and they did a ton of stuff right, and I don't want to dunk on Nier Automata, which was my number 3 game for a reason. I just happen to like this one more, and my favorite part about it is how once you start doing the multiple playthroughs and you get to look at what you're doing from different perspectives, you get to see how maybe things were not quite what you thought they were. I'm trying to be vague to avoid spoilers here, but your first playthrough, it seems like a standard good guy fights bad guys, good guy beats bad guys, saves the world type of thing. There's a few hints that it's not quite that if you're paying attention and looking for them, but if you're just going through the story and taking stuff at face value, then it just seems like a standard good versus evil story. But then, when you go through it for the second time, you get that slap in the face that maybe things were not quite as cut and dry as you thought. And honestly, I love the angle that they took with this one, because it's very clear that a lot of the stuff that's going on was very avoidable if things had happened differently, but at the same time, it's also clear that avoiding it wouldn't exactly be a happy ending for the characters involved, and very much by the time you finish going through the full story, it's very obvious that there was never actually going to be a happy ending to the whole way things went. And this one is interesting because the way I would describe it is, you can argue that it has a happy ending for the characters, but not so much for the world, because all I will say, in the interest of avoiding spoilers, is that by the time everything's said and done, it's very clear that your world is living on borrowed time, and there's not much mystery in how the world ends up in the state it is at the start of Automata from the end of Replicant. Also worth mentioning, I've only played Replicant on PC. I've not played the original Nier game that was on the Xbox 360. Well, original in terms of English releases. And I know there are some differences in that one, and Replicant's more complete in terms of certain pieces of content, which were exclusive. Those certain pieces of content that were exclusive to Japan-only audio dramas and stuff for a while, for getting put in Replicant. So I've never played that version of Nier that was on the Xbox 360. I have a copy, and I'm planning to play it eventually, but that's not happened yet. Still, it'll be interesting to see the differences when I finally get to that, and yeah, I honestly think this is probably going to be up there among my favorite games of all time for a very, very long time. It would take something truly special to outdo this one. But now, it's finally time for my number one game of everything I've played this year. The one title that actually managed to surpass the Nier games for me. So, you ready for this? My number one game that I played this year was Persona 5. Yeah, honestly, after how high Persona 3 wound up on my list, and how much I absolutely adore JRPGs, anyone that knew that I was playing this year could probably have seen this one coming, honestly. I will admit, though, that there is a little bit of a bias factor in this one, because Persona 5 was my first Persona game that I ever played. I did play Persona 3 later in the year, so that's probably a factor, but a lot of the same reasons as my Persona 3 playthrough applied, but just generally, although there are some exceptions as Nier Replicant showcases, in terms of stories, I'm more of a happy ending guy. I like my stories to end in a good, happy way, if possible, which is part of why this one sort of squeaked out a bit further up than Persona 3, just because Persona 3, it kind of ends on a bit of a sad, bittersweet note, and this one, basically everything gets resolved and everyone goes home happy, is basically the outcome when it comes to 5. Also, just character-wise, a lot of the characters and people in Persona 5 I just liked more than some of the ones in 3. Like, I'm not trying to dunk on any of Persona 3's characters. They were amazing, but the ones in Persona 5, I just was more invested in overall. Also, like I said, I played Persona 5 first, so I'm a little bit biased, but I liked it for a lot of the same reasons. But honestly, another part of it was the music. Persona 5 had just some of the best music in any video game that I've ever listened to, full stop, and I just absolutely love it, and I'm always going back to listen to it, and like, one of my common things that I do is I'll run a couple miles on the treadmill in my basement in the evening, and the Persona 5 soundtrack is some of the music that I will put on when I'm exercising. So, I just have a lot of love for that soundtrack. Yeah. And a lot of the other reasons, they sort of run parallel to, like I said, the ones I had for Persona 3. I just really like the superhero by night, normal student by day kind of thing, and I just thought the way they did a lot of the storytelling beats were really cool, and I had a great time with this game. So yeah, I realize some of those reasons might come across as a bit of a cop-out, but that's the best way I know to explain it. I like it because I had fun, and I think it was an enjoyable time, and this is the sort of game that I'm always going to be coming back to multiple times, even though I know what's going to be happening in the story. I just enjoy it. Although, one thing that is worth mentioning that I do want to bring up here with regards to Persona 5 is I didn't actually fully 100% complete it. I'm working on that, but my first playthrough, I managed to miss the royal content because I didn't get one of the confidants, the counselor, to rank 10 in time. I got faith and justice up there just fine, but I missed out on the counselor and didn't get him up there, so I'm doing that in New Game Plus. But even without the royal content, other than faith being in the game, of course, I'm having a really good time with this, and this game was the main reason I decided I wanted to start playing the other Persona games. And right now I am playing Persona 4 and the PSP version of Persona 1, actually. And this series is just a great time, and I'm so glad that Persona 5 got me into it in the first place. Absolutely zero regrets on that front. But anyways, that is my top games that I played this year, which was definitely not a top 10, and in fact, it hasn't been a top 10 in a good number of years. Again, I'm sorry it took me so long to get this out, but number one, I was just busy doing other things, and number two, in the middle of recording the audio for this, I actually caught COVID from my dad, who got it from a retirement home where his friend is staying because they don't believe in health precautions, apparently. So I'd been having to rest for that in the middle of recording this audio, which sort of slowed things down. Again, really sorry about that. I will try to be more regular about the content in the future. But anyways, if you have any thoughts about this list, you think I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, or you just want to claim that I'm literally Satan or something, or you agree with me, leave it down in the comments. It's been Dark Phoenix Gaming, and thank you for watching my top 15 games of 2025 video that I didn't manage to get released until 2026. See you next time.